think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
My segment is going to be quite a bit shorter in this episode. I'm just going to read one recent dated entry, and then a collection of some leftover undated entries. March 24th, 2018. This morning I was working with a deity who is heavily associated with owls, and I heard an owl outside. When I looked out the window to find it, it stopped. Also, last night I made an effigy of a deity I do workings against out of this stretchy goo putty toy stuff my nephew got me for Christmas, with the intention of it slowly melting down overnight, therefore distorting and symbolically defiling the horrible archetype. After I went into my bedroom for the night, I heard something in my kitchen fall to the floor, but I decided to ignore it since I didn't want to go back into the room and break the spell, so to speak. My spirits tell me that after invoking in what is basically my living room, and then I go to bed in my bedroom, I'm supposed to keep the door closed and be in there for the rest of the night. This morning, I saw that the cap for my thermos had fallen to the ground. It had been in the middle of the counter, next to the melting effigy. Since I don't have cats anymore, I can't ascribe it to them. My spirit said that it was an envoy of the enemy deity trying to get me to come back into the room. Undated entry. Some great bird thing attacked me spiritually. I dispelled it by reassuring it that it had to move on and that it was okay to do so. This apparently was very important and set it free in a way. And then it left me alone. Undated entry. 2 beings set against me from deities I was working against caused my wine to spill, trying to elicit an angry response from me. I cleaned it up efficiently and calmly, which surprised them. They then moved my pipe from where it was before to somewhere on the floor under the table where there was still spilled wine. I kept the negative visitors around to teach them a lesson of sorts. Apparently they left changed, betraying the one who sent them after me. Undated entry. I went into the kitchen and felt myself pass through a tall person in a spiritual way. After asking who it was, Thanatos responded and said that they were in the kitchen because of some fried chicken parts that were sitting out on a plate on the countertop. Thanatos was a bit upset with me for leaving out the scattered and desecrated remains of a dead animal. According to Thanatos, processed meat and such is different in that it has been spiritually laundered in a way. Undated entry. I saw an image paused on a visualizer that looked exactly like a creeper from Minecraft. I verbally pointed that out and then felt the presence of an antagonist. I was told that it was from a deity of negative chaos. One of my spirit allies began channeling through me, and I began reciting a nonsense speech about time, which descended into impossibility, rambling emphatically about fortnights and lunar cycles until I climaxed in slamming a cupboard shut repeatedly as he yelled something about retrotemporality at the top of my lungs. Then I cornered the thing in a way and screamed, "I'll deal with you later." It promptly disappeared. I remember another time where there was sort of invading or invasive being that I scared away by babbling complete nonsense, complete cognitive dissonance. And that's something that a lot of non-human beings are very uncomfortable with. They really, really, really don't like it. If you just say a whole bunch of random nonsense that makes no cognitive sense, it will drive them away. So will turning lights on and off really fast. They really don't like that at all either. Undated entry. I was pulled to a spot on the floor, which I channeled a lot of energy into, growling like a monster. I felt it streaming into the apartment downstairs. I thought I was done and acted casual next to it, but then I felt negativity spring out of it and I had to go growl some more energy down into that spot. Undated entry. I had a strong experience extracting nasty things from one of my cats. For a while, it was a smooth experience of surging energy through her until a lot of nasty things started streaming out. The funny thing is that they seemed to swarm into a section of one of my bookshelves which deals with hauntings. After a while of that, they swarmed to other bookshelves before dissipating outward. Undated entry. Morpheus pushed my phone off the table twice. Undated entry. Different forms of magic are technologies which have been conceptualized, invented, and established by someone, human or otherwise. Undated entry. In the scheme of the whole extraterrestrials, extra-dimensionals thing, this planet is a sometimes clumsy patchwork with many different parties involved, with many different agendas. Also, the humanoid form is one of the most important things about the human race and their place in the greater realms of life. And now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
There's recently been a rash of Mothman sightings in Singapore, and I'll read a handful of stories regarding that. A teacher in Singapore says he saw a winged humanoid inside an abandoned house. Fergus Waffles, a 46-year-old geography teacher at a Singapore school, today said he was walking his dog in the Stana Woodnyuk area when he spotted the alleged creature earlier this morning. I was walking in the woods with my dog near an abandoned house at about 5:50 a.m. I peered inside the window of the house and saw what appeared to be a winged humanoid hanging from a doorframe. My dog saw the creature and remained completely still and silent while staring its direction, he added. Waffles claims the humanoid was still, with just its chest moving up and down as if it was breathing. I was very startled at first, but the creature didn't notice me because as soon as I saw it, I took cover behind a nearby bush. The teacher said the unknown being was about 6 feet tall with an approximated 10-foot wingspan. It was hard to tell because the wings were wrapped around its body, similar to a sleeping bat, he said. It was black and had webbed wings similar to a bat. It had a human head, but slightly more round, and it had hair. It was like the Mothman. The encounter reportedly took about 15 seconds before the man left the area. Istana Woodnyuk, an abandoned royal palace originally owned by Johor Sultan Abu Bakr ibn Daing Ibrahim, is considered a haunted area by the locals. And this next story is actually from the same guy. A 46-year-old teacher said Tuesday he came across two small-winged humanoids in Singapore, just a month later after claiming to have seen a similar creature in the same area. Fergus Thomas, I guess he was using Waffles before, who teaches geography at a school in the southernmost tip of continental Asia, and had previously used a nickname, Waffles, to report another sighting, told Cryptozoology News he was coming back to the same location where he had claimed to have spotted the creature in late August when he came across two little creatures last Saturday. I reported my first sighting under a pseudonym in order to protect my identity. I had returned to the site of my original sighting once again, but what I saw was much more than I had expected, he said. I looked into the window of the abandoned house that I visited when I first saw Mothman, and what I saw was what appeared to be a pair of Mothman-like creatures, he added. Reportedly, he observed the beings handling sticks and rocks scattered on the ground in what appeared to be some sort of game. They seemed to be playing, he explains. It seemed like they were also attempting to fly, however, it seemed they were not yet fully developed enough to have acquired this skill. Thomas reports the sighting lasting about 3 minutes as it was interrupted by a distant shrill scream he believes was an adult Mothman. I heard the rustling of leaves. The scream seemed inhuman. He described the small creatures as being about 3 feet tall and having a wingspan of approximately 4 feet. He did not provide further details about their physical appearance, such as skin color, eyes, or head shape. But, despite it being the second alleged encounter, Thomas claims he was unable to gather photographic evidence because he had made the mistake of not bringing a camera, and that he does not own a mobile phone. I will attempt to return and see if I can acquire photographic evidence at a later stage. Southeast Asia has become a hotspot for reported Mothman sightings this month. In Kuala Lumpur, a woman on Thursday said she was startled by something that looked like a person with bat wings in the capital of Malaysia. Leah Fu, a 27-year-old freelance journalist, told Cryptozoology News that she was in the residential area of Bukit Tunku when she said she had a close encounter with a creature last Tuesday. I was contracted by a local paranormal magazine to write an article regarding Pontianak, or the ghostly spirits of women who died during childbirth. A particular abandoned house is well known to be haunted by these ghosts, Fu explained, who also claims to have worked as a holistic therapist prior to starting her journalistic career. However, I ended up citing something completely different, she continued. The woman says that as she walked deeper into the building, she heard a dry rustling noise coming from the room ahead. With the help of a flashlight, she reportedly ventured into the room to find out the source of the ruckus. I was terrified by what I saw. There were two glowing red eyes staring back at me. Then it began shrieking shrilly, bolted up, expanded its huge wings, and jerked its head menacingly towards me. Fu claims she was so frightened that she dropped her flashlight and couldn't see much as she managed to hide in the corner. At this point it was pitch black. I kept quiet. I could hear the heavy breathing of this creature. I heard a flapping noise and felt a huge gust of wind. After I was sure that I couldn't hear breathing and that the creature was gone, I stood up and ran out of the house, she recalls. She reported that the sighting lasted about 2 minutes, but she wasn't able to use her camera at the time. Yes, I was too frightened to think of recording the creature. I did notice a foul stench, like the smell of a rotting carcass. Fu said the creature had the frame of a man, with 2 legs and 2 arms, and stood at about 10 feet tall. Its body, she says, was covered in black leathery skin. It had enormous wings, like the wings of a bat, but larger. It was extremely thin and sinewy, and its eyes were human-shaped, but glowed red and light, said Fu, and she believes the unidentified being could be Mothman itself, adding that it could be the same one reported to have been seen in the neighboring country. I had read several of your articles regarding Mothman sightings in Singapore. Perhaps the Mothman is in Kuala Lumpur too, which is relatively nearby. This is the 4th Mothman sighting reported in Southeast Asia in less than 2 weeks. Bukit Tunku, formerly known as Bukit Kenny or Kenny Hill, is considered by residents and paranormal investigators to be one of the top haunted places in Malaysia. A woman claims she saw a creature that looked like a tall man with wings at an abandoned house in Singapore. 54-year-old avid bird watcher Alice Yindale said she was looking for birds near Dempsey Hill when she spotted the being inside the abandoned building last Sunday. It was 2:30 p.m. when my husband and I went to the forest looking for birds. I do love a good bird watching session, she told Cryptozoology News. This is why my husband and I live in Singapore, a hub of beautiful birds. We like this place because, unlike our house, it is quiet and tranquil. Yimdale reports that as they came near an empty building, she heard a loud fluttering sound. I was confused, so I decided to investigate. This is when I came across the thing. The woman said the being looked like a tall man with an enormous wingspan. I'd say around 9 to 10 feet. My husband says it was longer, she explains. It had a very thin body. Reportedly, the creature appeared to be barely moving and could have been a male or female. The couple maintained they had never seen anything like it before and that the 3-minute-long sighting was a bit scary but exciting. Cryptozoology News asked the birdwatchers regarding the lack of photographic evidence of the alleged incident, but there was not an immediate response. A 19-year-old claims he saw a winged humanoid in broad daylight in eastern Singapore. College student Mildred Wang said on Tuesday that he was scouting the location for a student film at an abandoned hospital near Changji. I was walking out of the hospital doors having explored the surroundings, he told Cryptozoology News. While I was inside, I had heard a noise which was similar to a large monkey rustling around the treetops. Juan says what happened next was one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. As I left the building, I saw the creature. It appeared to be halfway up one of the trees, with huge wings stretched out from its body, which appeared to be mostly human. Then, says the student, the animal emitted a high-pitched shriek, so he ran away in order to get out of the area. I felt as if the creature was hunting me, or else was surprised to see me in its territory. It seemed to look in my direction before I ran off. When I turned around, it had completely disappeared, he explained. Juan described the creature as 6 foot tall. It was a winged humanoid, and it was covered by a black, leathery skin. Its head was rounded and looked vaguely humanoid, although, he explains, it had a nose and a mouth that appeared to be full of sharp fang teeth. I was unable to see its eyes properly because it only appeared for a short amount of time. I have never seen any other animal or human like it, said Juan. He says that even though he had a camera with him due to the work he was doing for the future film, by the time the humanoid being showed up, he had already packed his equipment. Interesting thing I'll note is that even though these sightings may seem to be a bit suspect because they all didn't have a picture, these sort of things tend to magically, if you will, avoid providing evidence. Also, it is pretty striking that they all mentioned that it had black leathery skin and rounded head, since many Mothman sightings sometimes don't have a head or are described as being gray, so perhaps these people did see the same thing. In Livingston, Lothian, Scotland, on November 9, 1979, 61-year-old forestry foreman Bob Taylor had just parked his pickup truck in the woods and set off on foot with his dog to check out some trees in a clearing near the highway. When he reached the clearing at about 10:30 a.m., he saw hovering just above the ground a gray sphere with several dark portholes above its ring-like rim. When Taylor tried to focus on the details, the object appeared to fade in and out of focus, as if trying to camouflage itself, the witness noted. Suddenly, 2 beach ball-sized things came rolling from the craft toward Taylor at a good clip, making a kind of suction noise. The things, said Taylor, looked like sea mines, with 6 legs. Within moments, the mines were at his feet. Taylor smelled an odor so pungent that it struck him down unconscious. About 20 minutes later, Taylor recovered, hearing his dog bark. The witness was lying on the wet ground with a burning sensation on his chin and an itchy left thigh. The things and the object were gone. Taylor felt weak and nauseous, and his throat burned. He struggled to get back to his truck and tried but failed to radio for help. He then attempted to drive, but, lacking coordination, quickly got his truck stuck in the mud. He finally staggered home to his wife, who found him exhausted and dirty, his pants torn. While a doctor examined Taylor, the police treated the case as a physical assault and began an extensive criminal investigation. At the site, they found lines in the ground, indentations consistent with the imprint from a heavy object, and holes dug by the spike balls as they attacked Taylor. One skeptic suggested that Taylor had encountered ball lightning, but those who know the witness have testified to his sincerity and reject the notion of a natural explanation. On October 5, 1954, in Rovabello, Italy, a fisherman met with a red-clad being who spoke an unknown language. No details. On October 5, 1954, at 0400 hours, in Loctedy, France, a baker, P. Lucas, was draining water from a well when he noticed an object some distance away. It was circular, about 3 meters diameter. From it emerged a dwarf with an oval face, covered with hair and eyes as large as raven's eggs. He touched him on the shoulder and spoke to him in an unknown language. The dwarf went away and the object took off. On October 5, 1954, at 0630 hours, east of Le Mans on Route N23 in France, Renault employees were going to work when they saw near the road a luminous object on the ground and felt pricklings and a sort of paralysis. The object emitted a burst of green light and flew away very low over the fields. On October 5, 1954, at 0715 hours, in Meurtrude, France, a road mender, Mr. Narcy, saw an object near the road between Vaux-le-Comte and La Neuville. In a report to police, he stated he saw a hairy dwarf wearing an orange, tight-fitting jacket climb aboard the craft, which consisted of a cigar-shaped section under a flat disc. Between the 2 sections was a kind of porthole through which the entity entered the object. Traces were found at the spot. On October 5, 1954, at 1545 hours, in Beaumont, France, 10 kilometers from here, several persons saw an object coming toward them and getting brighter. When it was about 150 meters away, they felt a strange sensation and found themselves unable to move. The object left a smell comparable to that of nitrobenzene. Now returning to some strange events in Italy, in Lake Como, lake monster reports. In Cosenza, Calabria, bloody profile of Jesus' face appeared on wall at home of stigmatic Sister Elena Aiello. Began flowing blood 29 September 1955, intermittently continued until her death in 1961. Also, a 12-foot reptile with long fur and walking on four legs seen by several people, July 1981. In Forley, 15-foot reptile chased witness, July 1969. In Formia, objects would catch fire when boy gazed at them, and electrical items were affected, began 1982. On Gorgona Island in the Adriatic Sea, a USO was seen, 22nd June 1979. At Goro, 10-foot snake with legs seen, summer 1975. In Isola, near La Spezia, cigar-shaped UFO landed, and 3 small entities emerged and took away farmers' rabbits from their cages. He aimed his rifle at them, but it failed and was too heavy to hold. He was also paralyzed, 14th November 1954. In Lanciano, Eucharistic miracle. Bread and wine turned to real flesh and blood in 8th century. And these sacred relics are intact 12 centuries later, scientifically examined in 1970. In Maropati, painting of Madonna, wept human blood from eyes, heart, hands, and feet, and blood formed into crosses on the wall below, beginning 3rd January 1971. In Marta, Viterbo, 4 young girls and adults saw visions of Blessed Virgin Mary in cave, 19th May 1948. In Monterose, or Monterose, 8-foot reptile with green and yellow body seen, August 1935. In Nuoro, Sardinia, water seeped through floor of whichever hospital ward 9-year-old boy was in, November 1972. In Paravati, Natuzzo Ivolo made hemographs, or blood pictures. Near Perugia, water monsters seen in marshes, which are linked to the sea by the river Tiber, 1933 or 1934. In Pescara, plate with images of Pope John XXIII and President John Kennedy weeping blood, January 1974. In Piacenza, eels fell from the sky, 9th June 1957. We'll get back to that Kennedy one. It is interesting because Kennedy was the first openly Catholic U.S. president, and so a lot of Catholic people revered him as a Catholic figure, even a saint perhaps. In Po di Noca, farmer watched disc-shaped UFO land, deep crater found at site, and trees were burnt, 15th October 1954. In Rome, thousands saw UFO maneuvering over the city, also tracked on radar, 17th September 1954. Poltergeist outbreak, 19th April to May 2nd, 1975. And mystery fires erupted in offices in summer of 1984.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
I'm going to read a chapter from the book This House is Haunted, The Investigation into the Enfield Poltergeist by Guy Lyon Playfair. The chapter is called 10 Coincidences. In the early hours of August 5th, 1976, a motorcycle ridden by a 22-year-old medical student named Adam Speller crashed in the center of Cardiff. No other vehicles were involved, and the cause of the accident was never established. Speller was killed outright, while his pillion passenger, a journalist of the same age named Janet Gross, was rushed to hospital, still alive though seriously injured. On August 4th, Janet's parents were lying on a beach in Jersey, where they were on holiday. Suddenly, Betty Gross felt ill in a way she had never felt before. The unpleasant feeling passed after half an hour and never returned. That evening, Maurice Gross attended a service at a Jersey synagogue. It was a special service to commemorate the fast day of the 9th of Av, and he was specially asked to make up the quorum of 10 men required for the service on the one holy day of the Jewish year in which the congregation actually sits in mourning. So just a few hours before his daughter's accident, he was sitting in mourning. Janet Gross died at about 4:20 p.m. on the 5th of August. Her parents just managed to get to the hospital to see her, though she never regained consciousness. Her head was swathed in bandages, although she had been wearing a crash helmet. The cause of her death was given as head injury. The day of the accident was also the birthday of Janet's brother Richard, and that morning he received a birthday card from her, which she had posted the previous day. The front cover of the humorous card showed a bedraggled-looking girl with her head swathed in bandages. The caption read, "I was going to send you a bottle of toilet water for your birthday." It was the height of the Great Drought of 1976. Inside the card, the printed caption went on, "But the lid fell on my head. Happy birthday." Underneath this, Janet had written, "And there won't be much left of that soon either." Lots of love, Jan, Welsh correspondent. She was working at the time at the weekly Cardiff Leader. About half an hour before the accident, Maurice Gross's sister-in-law Miriam had an unusually vivid nightmare, not about Janet, but her young grandson who was drowning. Miriam learned of Janet's death at 5:30 p.m., about an hour after it had taken place. 2 hours later, she went out to visit Janet's brother and elder sister. Just before she left her home, she noticed that her rotating pendulum clock was going. It had not been going for over a year. She pointed this out to her husband, but said nothing about it to the Grosses until several months later. When Miriam and her husband arrived home at about 11:30 p.m., the clock was still ticking. The following morning, they had got up to find that it had stopped in the night. The hands showed 4:20. This was approximately the hour which Janet had died 12 hours previously. The Grosses had an identical clock in their house, but it behaved quite normally. Janet's funeral was set for the 7th of August. The day before, Maurice's extreme grief at the sudden loss of his daughter was tempered with a strange feeling that too many coincidences had already been connected with it. The birthday card was the most striking. It actually seemed to predict death, although in a light-hearted manner. Her head was swathed in bandages when they saw her on her deathbed, just like that of the cartoon figure on the card. The lid, or crash helmet, must have been in some way involved in the injuries that caused her death, and after writing, "And there won't be much of that left soon either," Janet had drawn an arrow pointing to the printed word head. Then, it was strange that Maurice should have been at a memorial service for the first time in many years only a few hours before the accident. Then there were Betty's sudden brief spell of sickness and Miriam's nightmare. 4 coincidences already. And there were more to come. Gross found himself wondering whether Janet, if she had somehow survived her physical death, would send him a sign of some kind on the day of her funeral. He had read widely on the subject of psychical research for 40 years, and he knew that such things had often been reported. It had not rained for several weeks, and Gross thought to himself that a suitable sign would be a drop of rain. He said nothing about this even to his wife. The following day, he woke up at 8:15 a.m. He went into his first-floor bathroom and looked out of the window, as he always did. From there, he could see the roof of the kitchen, which extended out into the garden directly below the window of Janet's room. The kitchen roof was soaking wet. He called Betty to make sure he was not imagining things, but she agreed that the roof was indeed thoroughly wet. And look, she added, everything else we can see from here is bone dry. The drought of 1976 lasted well into the final week of August, and this coincidence was all the more striking because Gross had specifically asked for a drop of rain. And there it was, on the roof, right below Janet's bedroom, and nowhere else. Then came the episode of the candles. After a Jewish funeral, it is customary to light a memorial candle on each of the 7 days of mourning. The glass tumbler candles are specifically designed not to go out, and they normally burn for well over 24 hours. On the evening of 8th of August, Gross lit the first candle for Janet. By the following day, it had gone out, although there was plenty of wick and wax left, and there were no drafts. Neither Gross nor his married daughter Marilyn Grant, a chemistry graduate, could give any explanation of why it had stopped burning. He took another candle, checked it carefully, and lit it. By the next morning, this candle too had gone out for no apparent reason. And exactly the same thing happened yet again, 3 days running. For the remaining 4 days of the mourning period, however, all candles burned as they should, and were still lit when Gross came to remove them. There had to be a limit, he thought, to the number of coincidences that could be expected by pure chance. There had been 8 already: Betty's sudden illness, the unexpected memorial service, the birthday card, the rain, Miriam's nightmare, and the candles. The clock episode, had he known about it at the time, would have made 9. Gross had a very strong feeling that Janet had not entirely ceased to exist. Shortly afterwards, he wrote down an account of all these events and sent it to the Society for Psychical Research. It was the first time he had ever made contact with the SPR, despite his lifelong interest in the subject. Maurice Gross was born in London in 1919. He was educated at the Regent Street Polytechnic, and after an apprenticeship in commercial art and design, he served throughout the Second World War in the Royal Artillery. Receiving his commission in 1941, he married Betty in 1944, and they had 3 children, of whom Janet was the youngest. After the war, following a period with his family's retail business, Gross found his true vocation as an inventor of electrical and mechanical devices. He filed the first of his many worldwide patents in 1945 for a mechanical toy, and in 1962 he set up his own design engineering and display consultancy business, through which he successfully launched many of his own inventions all over the world. These ranged from simple shelf fittings to highly complex vending machines, poster changers seen at many international airports, and one of the world's first fully automatic newspaper dispensers. A member of both the Royal Institution and the Institute of Patentees and Inventors, he also spent a good deal of his time in community work and in animal and youth welfare organizations. He was also a warden in the United Synagogue. Gross's interest in psychic matters in 1977 was a purely philosophical one. Like any practicing Jew, he was mindful of the stern prohibitions listed in the 5th book of Moses, or Deuteronomy 18:10-12. There shall not be found among you anyone that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. This is not to say that Jews deny the existence of all psychic phenomena, or that they are forbidden to have anything to do with them. Many of them believe that the soul remains hovering around the earth plane for 30 days or so after physical death, and then gradually ascends to its proper destination with the help of prayers, which only cease after 11 months. The Jewish religion is not dogmatic on this subject, however, and religious Jews are encouraged to make up their own minds on this, and indeed every other question. This is certainly what Gross decided to do after his daughter's death, and he felt that a little practical research would not be out of order, provided it were done in a spirit of philosophical inquiry and not merely for sensation-seeking. It was with his professional and religious background that he applied for membership of the SPR, and as soon as he was accepted, he made it clear that he intended to become one of its more active members. He had made full use of the Society's unique library, and was invariably first off the mark at discussion time after the monthly lecture meeting. I remember him castigating one speaker for his use of such terms as general extrasensory perceptions and psi field. "You don't explain anything with all these words," he declared. "What do you really know?" I could see, even before I got to know him, that Gross was not going to be too popular with some members. He had little patience with academic debate. He wanted to get on with the job the SPR was originally founded to do, research and publicize. Therefore, when George Fallows telephoned Eleanor O'Keefe, the SPR secretary was able to kill two birds with one stone. Not only did she provide him with the investigator he wanted at very short notice, but she was able to keep Gross quiet and give him the case he had asked for so often lately. This was the 10th coincidence. As soon as he received the call from the SPR, Gross left his office in the middle of a busy Monday, and within an hour of Fallows' call for help, his gleaming red Jaguar was pulled up outside of Harper's home.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This is called Alter Everything, spelled A-L-T-A-R, a dialogue with Genesis P-Orridge by Mitch Mignano, and it was posted to realitysandwich.com in 2017. Genesis P-Orridge is without a doubt one of the most enigmatic artists of our time. For starters, Genesis's late 1970s band, Throbbing Grizzle, is credited with pioneering the industrial music genre, while his/her next musical project, Psychic TV, would later evolve into a fellowship of artists and occultists called the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was heavily influenced by the ideas of William Burroughs, Brian Gysin, Aleister Crowley, and Austin Osman Spare. Add to that the fact that in the late 1990s, Genesis P-Orridge would embark on the Pandrogyny Project, undergoing multiple significant body modifications along with lover Lady J in order to, quote, become each other to become one. And that in 2010, he published a, quote, new manual on practical magic called The Psychic Bible. And you quickly realize how truly singular Genesis is as both an artist and a human being. But for Genesis, art and life are not separate. Having lived for many years in Nepal's Kathmandu Valley, the non-dualistic way of life of the Tibetans would influence Genesis to live a more fully integrated existence and to communicate this way of being through creative work that Western eyes might find revelatory. Genesis's current exhibit, Try to Alter Everything, at the Rubin Museum in New York City does just that. And according to the copy for the exhibit, for nearly half a century, Genesis Breyer P-Orridge has been questioning the meaning and substance of identity through artistic endeavors, willful reincarnation, and physical shapeshifting. Try to Alter Everything, a selection of paintings, sculptures, and installations, will explore the ways that Hindu mythology and Nepal's Kathmandu Valley have influenced the artist and his/her work. Reality Sandwich caught up with Genesis P-Orridge for an interview to discuss these themes and attempt to penetrate more deeply into the mind of this truly enigmatic figure. The reader should note that as per Genesis's efforts to apply William Burroughs' cut-up technique to the body itself, transcending the limits of being trapped in a single meat suitcase, and uniting with the body and spirit of his/her lover Lady J, Genesis often uses the pronoun we rather than the typical I that the rest of us use. It can be a little confusing at first, but simply thinking in this way makes us think differently about what it means to be human. Mitch Mignano asks, "What first brought you to Kathmandu, Nepal?" Genesis answers, "We began Psychic TV in 1991, which was always interconnected with the Temple of Psychic Youth. That was because we wanted to be more than just a band. When a band is trying to do serious music with real messages, ideas, and concepts, it can be very frustrating. There's more to this than trying to have a hit record. And as a consumer who's interested in more, you're hungry for more information. We wanted to be the band that supplies the maximum extra information. We set up a worldwide network. At one point, it was approximately 10,000 people, of whom around 3,000 were very active in different ways. That lasted from 81 to 91. Somewhere around 89, we were talking to the person that ran a Temple of Psychic Youth in England. He told us about a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Scotland he'd been going to called Samye Ling. He originally went because they had programs for junkies and he wanted to understand why he was addicted to various opiates. He ended up becoming part of the Tibetan Buddhist belief system. He said, "You should go, Jen, you'd like that. You're always saying how you're interested in Tibetan culture." So in the back of my mind I knew there was this monastery, but that was about all. Every year with my $2, Carice and Janice, we would hire a little camper and travel around Britain, finding ancient prehistoric sites the equivalent of Stonehenge. We would wander around almost aimlessly, and when we found one of these ancient sites, we would hang out there for 2 days, meditate, and just be. Just be away from all the usual Western culture. In the late summer, early winter of 1990, we were doing that in Scotland. It was the middle of the night, pitch black, and we were lost driving in the middle of all these forestry plantations. There were no street signs or street lights anymore, no freeways, just lanes. We saw this figure hitchhiking ahead on the road. It was some man in gray robes and a hood. The obvious thought was, that's some kind of a priest or a monk. So we pulled over and asked where they were going. The person said that way and pointed up the street. We said, yeah, but where are you going? He said, that way. We said, get in and we'll take you as far as we can. So we got in the back with my 2 daughters and we drove for a while. Suddenly his voice from the back went, this is where I get out. We looked and there was nothing there, just trees and blackness. No buildings, no lights, no nothing. We pulled over and out this person got. We turned around to say, it was nice meeting you, and there was no one there. We said to the kids, where'd that guy go? They said they didn't know, he just got out. We looked and there was no sign of him in any direction. That was a bit spooky, you know. We kept going straight. After a few hundred yards, we saw lights in front of us on the other side of the road. As we got nearer, we saw Tibetan prayer flags in the trees, a driveway, and a parked car with lights on. We thought, that looks like it could be the monastery our friend told us about years ago. What else could it be? Whatever it was looked friendly compared to the total black. This nun came running out of the building, rushed up to us, and knocked on the door. She said, we've been waiting for you. We went, what do you mean you've been waiting for us? We don't even know where we are. She said, yeah, Lama Yeshe is waiting to see you and have dinner. We're like, what the fuck is she talking about? We went inside and there's about 100 people, monks, nuns, and those who weren't fully initiated, seated at these long tables. At the head of one was a Tibetan monk with a bald head and a big grin. In front of him were 2 seats to either side for my 2 children, me and the children's mother. Everybody just sat there waiting for us to arrive. Was this that person in robes? My thought is that Lama Yeshe, the retreat master, led us to the monastery for his reasons. Very spooky. We sat down at our places, ate with everybody, and stayed for a few days. We did meditations, prostrations, and relaxed by this wide, shallow little river. It was a beautiful spot. We got to know Lama Yeshe. One day he said, come and talk to me. We went to his room in the building. He sat cross-legged in his robes on these beautiful pillows and rugs, watching cartoons on the TV and laughing all the time. He said, Genesis, you're not happy with your life right now, are you? No. You're kind of sick of the rock and roll business and you don't know what to do. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Go to Kathmandu. We have a monastery there and we think you would really like going there and being with the people in Kathmandu for a while. We realized it all fit together. The friend who told us about Samye Ling, the figure that said that way, Lama Yeshe, and them expecting me, it seemed like this was something that we were really supposed to do. So we started planning to go to Kathmandu. At that time, we were friends with the people at the October Gallery in London, one of the buildings that Synergias have. Someone we knew that was involved with them at the time was Evans. We told her about what happened, and she told us about a hotel they had in Kathmandu, the Vajra Hotel. I'm sure we can give you a special rate, she said. It's a really nice hotel. It'd be a good base of operations for you. We said, okay, let's do that. We'd been going to the October Gallery regularly, doing exercises, learning about Gurdjieffian theories, and so on. Before we left for Kathmandu, we put out a call to everyone in the Temple of Psychic Youth. We told them that we were planning on going there and that the monastery we were working with was planning to do a soup kitchen to help Tibetan refugees, beggars, and lepers survive through the winter. We asked them to donate warm clothes and anything else they could to help. And the fans did. They sent loads of beautiful things which we put into a great big package and shipped with us when we went to Kathmandu in the fall of '91. Off we went. Myself, my then spouse, and my 2 children had an adventure to Kathmandu, thanks to Lama Yeshe. We stayed in the Vajra Hotel, made contact with the monastery, and as much as we could, financed the soup kitchen. Every morning at about 5 a.m., we would get up with the children and walk down to Bodhanath Stupa, one of the very famous stupas in Kathmandu. We would make great big tureens of rice and dal with the monks. Anyone who sat down around the stupa at 7 to 8 a.m. would be fed with rice, dal, and clean water. We did that about twice a day every day, right through the winter, for 3 months or so. 300 to 500 people twice a day paid for through the Temple of Psychic Youth. A few days before we set off to Kathmandu, Evans got in touch with me. She told me that when she lived in Kathmandu with the Vajra Hotel people, she got to know a guy called Trilochan. He was an amazing, wild, psychedelic Nepali guy that got busted for drugs and sent to prison. She hadn't heard from him since. It'd been a few years. She said she'd be grateful if I could find out what happened. One morning, my daughters asked for an English breakfast, so we took them to Themel, a tourist area. As we're thinking that no place there would serve an English breakfast, we saw a restaurant called Third Eye. We immediately thought of William Burroughs and Brian Geison's The Third Mind. Third Mind, Third Eye, which is as good a reason as any, so we tried it. They did serve us an English breakfast. No one else was in there for a while. Then this really tall, big guy, like a giant, walked in looking a bit nervous. He sat by himself and kept looking both ways out the window. We're wondering who he is. He looked like someone trying to make a deal. When he ordered food and English breakfast, we heard that he was English. So we walked over and said, couldn't help hearing that you're English, hi. What's good to do in Kathmandu? He introduced himself as Big John. It turned out that he was involved with Mr. Knife, a drug smuggler that got busted for marijuana. After we sat back down with the kids, a short, skinny Nepali guy, really speedy and squirrely, came in and sat with him. As they chatted, we remembered Evans asking us about Trilochan. Since this guy knew Big John, he might know him too. So we asked Big John's friend if he'd heard of a guy named Trilochan, and he went really quiet and still. He asked, why do you want to know? We told him. He said, I'm Trilochan. I got out of prison this morning. That's how I fell in love with Kathmandu. What are the odds, right? To this day, we're good friends with Trilo. We call each other soul brothers. It was a really auspicious morning. And the interviewer asked, "Wow, nice work there. Let me go a bit deeper and ask what it was that you saw in Hindu or Buddhist mythology that drew you to identify with it." Answer: during the 50s in England, if you did well with exams and were particularly bright, you could be bumped up a year. At 9 years old, we were already in a class called 11 plus. We were in it up to 11 years old, so by that point we were a bit bored with the basic program. Also, we were always ill with asthma and spent 3 months of every year sick in bed. How we dealt with being alone all the time was to read books. Thank goodness my parents were both avid readers too, my father especially. He had a really good library of books, and nothing was censored. He let us read anything. It didn't matter if we understood it or if it was unlikely material for my age group. One day he said, "Why don't you read this book?" It was 7 Years in Tibet by Heinrich Harrer. We read it and were absolutely fascinated. That's when we became infatuated with the mysterious and exotic world of Tibetan Buddhism in the Himalayas. That was implanted early on. We continued to read anything about Tibetan Buddhism and anything related right through the 60s. As we got more into music, we became fascinated with Tibetan music. It stayed with me. The very first Psychic TV album, Force the Hand of Chance, had a bonus album with it, Themes 1. There's a track which is 23 minutes of Tibetan thigh bone trumpets. One of the things we loved about Tibetan music was that you didn't have to be skilled at an instrument to play it. From our understanding, when a new monk arrived, the older monks would assign them an instrument based on their personality. We loved this idea that you didn't have to know how to play something in order to play it. It was about your spirit and what you were going to draw out of yourself that was relevant. The sound you made would always be appropriate to your spiritual being. Rules and regulations, structures and traditions, go fuck yourself. We brought all of that to bear with throbbing grizzle and industrial music, of course. To this day, we can't play anything. We couldn't even play Three Blind Mice on any instrument. We don't even know how to tune anything, but we've made over 300 albums. Go figure, the Tibetans were right. Sometime in the 80s, I saw a sign that said Dr. Alan Presence is giving a talk and demonstration of Tibetan singing bowls and thigh bone trumpets at some small cultural space. We went and recorded it. We are fascinated by Tibetan instruments, the spirit of everything and the frequencies they were using. We learned that the frequencies could have a direct impact on what endorphins were released, impacting how they were utilized. For instance, we still have the singing bowl he got from me that's meant to destroy demons, which means migraines. It works. We've used it for people. One day while walking down Portobello Road with a friend, we suddenly got this strong urge to go inside a closed shop. The door was open. It looked completely empty, but in the back there were a couple of stores that still had people. There was a guy with a couple of singing bowls on display that looked familiar. We told him about the talk with Dr. Alan Presence, and he said he was Dr. Alan Presence. Oh, of course you are. Of course we walked into this derelict shop and you were there. We told him we wanted a thigh bone trumpet, and he pulled one out from under the counter. We still have it. It's at least 300 years old. It belonged to a Tibetan monk. That's why we're so in love with Tibet. Things like this happen all the time. When we got off the plane to Tibet, it was like we'd taken psychedelics. The thing that impressed and stays with me to this day was that there was no separation between devotion and the spiritual with mundane daily activities. They were all fully integrated, equal significance. Eating something nourishing was just as valid as doing a puja to heal somebody, or chanting for an hour, or listening to teachings from a wise monk. Everything was fully integrated on every level. You can walk down the street and see somebody doing a sacrifice over a Shiva lingam, other people buying and selling things in the grocery shop, and someone else rushing to work in their little office power suit. Nothing is out of whack. Everything is in imbalance. Nothing looks out of place. Nobody looks askance at whatever else is going on. You get to the burning ghats, and they're burning people and sweeping ashes into the river. There are people up the rivers doing their laundry. Other people are bathing. It's all part of this wonderful psychedelic process of energies where everything is equal and nothing has more or less significance than anything else. Like the path of Agori, the path of no distinction. Interviewer asked, now let's bring a bit of Burroughs and Geisen into the conversation. In your experience, how are you able to engage with mythological systems or cosmologies while still maintaining your personal autonomy? Answer. We do not call ourselves Buddhists or Hindu. We do not specifically follow any deities or mimic any rituals. The real point is the essence of it. In the West, it's often called synchronicity, but we feel it's far more potent than that. You can build a relationship with a non-physical world, probably the same world as quantum mechanics. Beneath everything, there are relationships with the universe, with particles, with the so-called laws of physics, with transcendental thought, concepts of mortality and immortality, existing and non-existing, the physical and the non-physical. Somewhere amongst all of the search we've lived, there is this basic core, what we call the of course factor. Of course we met Lama Yeshe. Of course he said go to Kathmandu. Of course there was a hotel. Of course we met Srilo, and so on. The of course factor is evidence of the rightness in this apparently mysterious path. The path is always towards wisdom. As Brian Geisen said to me when we became friends, wisdom can only be passed on by the touching of hands. There is a sculpture in the Rubin Museum about that. It's a bronze cast of my right arm from the elbow down in the position of shaking hands. It says next to it, wisdom can only be passed on by the touching of hands, and people can literally hold my hand. Hopefully, it will get shiny over the years, like those Buddha and saint statues that get shiny where people kiss or rub them. We're not saying we're a saint, we're deliberately referencing the idea of repetition and submission to the idea of continuity passed on from person to person throughout the story of our species. Question. Now, if we can go in a different direction, there is a chasm between the wisdom in the East and the way we exist in the West. And you see that evolving, the either-or dichotomies, the duality in general. Answer, they have to be extinct. Question, how did we get caught up in this trap of good and evil? Who's to blame? Answer, when somebody's parents have sex and an egg is fertilized, you immediately begin the story of either-or. Not always, but nearly. People start saying, is it a boy or a girl? Either or. Then they start deciding what name it should have, their expectations of it, what it will become, and it's not even out yet. This poor little slug hasn't even come out of the vagina yet, and it's hearing all this because you hear through skin. People program you with their desires, expectations, fears, prejudice, disappointment in themselves and their lives. That's being funneled at us from the very beginning and continues once people emerge into the physical world. That's the beginning of the problem. It continues when you begin socializing and making friends. They're boys or girls, nice or not nice. You get the pressure of peer groups, other people's opinions, the media, economics, and so on. There's a constant pressure as to what you should be or the choices you should make from the very beginning. That's disastrous in and of itself. In the early days, when our species was still in caves and there were Neanderthals and sapiens and so on, male aggression and strength had a purpose to perpetuate the species. We needed aggression to protect the next load of children, the food source, etc. It fit with the environment. It was necessary for the clan to survive. Over thousands of years, we've developed an ever more sophisticated and totalitarian power over our environment. We've changed the environment in which humans live. We've spent immense amounts of intellectual attention and research to do that, to protect ourselves and build these great big civilization structures. But not many people or cultures have bothered to truly develop the behavioral environment to match. What you have is a wonderful, sophistical, digital, postmodern society and environment. But you still have prehistoric behavior patterns wherein the brutal male of the species is just left there festering. The evidence is in the fact that there's been more than one war. When we give talks, we ask people, how could there ever be a second war? How could you look at people dying, bleeding in agony and not say never again? People do say it out loud, but they don't really mean it because they do it again. It's been going on for tens of thousands of years. We're out of whack. Something's wrong. The male genetic behavioral patterns of our species are literally leading us to the abyss. We're trying to apply prehistoric behavior to a completely sophisticated technological environment. It doesn't work. It can't work unless we find ways to change behavior. The great question is it even possible to change behavior? The either-or doesn't work. It's how we got invested in the work of Agori, the path of no distinction, the either-or male-female, black-white, Muslim-Christian, rich-poor. It's a failed system. How many thousands of years of evidence do you need that it does not work? It has not ended suffering or violence. Something is wrong with the behavioral imperatives of our species. Question. Let's move to one of the more provocative and enigmatic aspects of your life and work, pandrogyny. Jung saw Christ as the archetype of the self, and Rudolf Steiner professed that the individuation process is the crucible for further human evolution. Do you see pandrogyny as more of a return to a primordial way of being, or as a transcendence of individualistic materialism? Answer. Oh God, you're asking difficult questions. There are so many motives for pandrogyny. The longer we've delved into its implications, the stronger we feel that pandrogyny is crucial to a shift in the way our species works. Obviously, with pandrogyny, there's no longer male or female. There's just the panderdigium. If it was possible, we would love for the species to become the divine hermaphrodite. For everybody to be male and or female, or more than that. Timothy Leary said that this time around you can be anything. You realize that genetics are part of the issue. In a utopian vision, the being can redesign itself in any way it chooses. You can have fur, peacock feathers, or gills and live underwater. I agree with Brian Geisen and William Burroughs that this species, any species, is supposed to expand outwards, but we won't be able to while we have this great big albatross on our back. Pandrogyny goes so many places once you say the human body is just a physical meat suitcase. Tesla called it a meat machine. Jay called it a cheap suitcase for the brain. Leary used to say the body was just so the brain could be moved around. The body is not us. The being that we speak with in our own mind, the I or we, depending how you do it, consciousness, is us. The physical world is where we travel, where our bodies give us a chance to experience sensory moments, but the I being is consciousness. That's one of the other things that drew me to Tibet. This nation has devoted huge amounts of its population to meditation, travel, and exploration of consciousness. That is the example we should be looking at, and we nearly managed it in the 60s. Human beings are wonderful creatures in potentia, bound and gagged, hypnotized and intimidated, and imagining that the world we see through our eyes is real. It's not. If you can take a little piece of liquid paper to make it vanish, it's not very real. The world we see outside is an agreement on a really insipid version of potential. We see the Empire State Building out our window, loads of power blocks, projects. How could your species choose to do that to itself? You know what's wrong with our vision? We have the space to do something different. Wasn't it Steiner who said we shouldn't have square rooms or windows but all curves? Yes, it was. But this is what we do. We keep running the program. Answer: yeah. We're really in a critical point. We have to decide on how we want to evolve. That's where we got into with pandrogyny. It started out as Jay and I wanting to be immersed in each other, and hopefully explore different dimensions after physical death in this realm. We realized the implication of it when we looked at genetics. Our bodies had a program to become a particular way, and we wanted to deny that program and have control over what our bodies evolve and look like. Then you realize it's about evolution. We're at a point where the species has to decide whether to evolve or implode and go back to the unpleasant Dark Ages. The odds are high for the Dark Ages, unfortunately, but we do have the option to make a different decision. So while Tibet has its flaws, it was a bit medieval, it's so fabulous for over 70% of a nation to focus on out-of-body travel. Question: I want to ask you a question about sound and then music. Are you familiar with McLuhan's work? McLuhan drew our attention to text-based consciousness as an imperial program, where the priests control the knowledge in a centralized system. He then suggested that electronic technologies return us to an aural and tribal sense of space where the magical resonances return to power. In this context, I often think of rock and roll records as a contemporary analog to ancient scrolls. And I wonder if future humans might have their beings formed out of music rather than text programs. Do you suppose that it's possible that, in a very real sense, we are what we hear? Answer: oh God, we need symposiums for each question. You're asking such wonderful questions. Let's confess right now that we're good at putting things together and following clues through culture, but we're bad at memorizing anything, so we don't come across as very academic. As Jay used to say, we're eccentrolectricals. We worked a lot with Burroughs, who focused my attention on language and how important it is in terms of how this planet and culture are controlled. Language is integral to the suppression of the imagination. It doesn't have to be, but that's how it was utilized by those who have privilege and power. Burroughs was fascinated with hieroglyphs because they aren't linear and there's no alphabet. Because of this, he believed they worked directly on the nervous system and could bypass imposed filters of culture. As we said before, you're programmed by people's expectations even before you come out of the womb. For me, language is critical in war against control. It's critical in the short-circuiting of control. When Burroughs and I first met in 1971, he said, "Genesis, your task is, how do you short-circuit control?" And we thought, well, that was a bit pretentious, William. But we have to confess that we've been thinking about it ever since. He programmed me with an anti-program. He put a little virus in. Short-circuiting control means you have to think, where is control, what is control, how does it operate, and what are its leverages. Language is essential within that. Have you studied any neuro-linguistic programming? A bit. Lady J and I did some courses on NLP too, and it's shattering how easily the mind can be manipulated by the emphasis of words and naming. This is relevant to the question of music because a lot of my poetry and lyrics deal with language and its ability to control. The lyrics to Greyhounds of the Future are basically a manifesto about language and its ability to oppress and the need to break language in order to liberate imagination and potential. Language is one of the keys. For a long time, language is not particularly sophisticated in terms of music. Bob Dylan, more than anyone else, recognized that song with a message had incredible power and potential. People who sing protest songs at demonstrations all over the world recognize that. There are these memes that can be created as word within music. It's a return to the ancient systems of chants, prayers, and tribal voices. The musician and lyricist is the healing voice of its people. The job is to be the troubadour of the people's minds. It's demographic. It's a huge responsibility to speak up and find ways to describe, with words and sounds, the complex issues we're dealing with in this environment. Ironically, the next person after Dylan was Lou Reed and the Velvets. They took the idea of the lyrics having that potency and then saw how far they could stretch that, how far they could take it back to the actual lives on the street, to the people themselves, and what they really experience in their negative moments. Without wanting to sound overly egocentric, we think that Throbbing Grizzle, with My Lyrics, took it to the end. They said nothing is immune from being part of a song or lyric. Absolutely anything and everything can be dealt with in the context of music and words. The job of music and words is to be troubadours of all the different potentialities of our futures. We still believe that and think it's important to maintain a relationship with the spoken word and the written word, the complexities of multi-layered meanings in terms of how one writes a lyric. Of everything we do, writing lyrics is what we spend the most time on. For me, lyrics and poems are very interchangeable. We sweat buckets over every single word, the gaps and the pauses and whether or not anything should be there, why it's there, and the secret links with everything else. We might use one word, and for me personally that word relates to The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. We expect no one else to know, but we feel it's there. We wrote an essay called The Splinter Test about that. We've thought about language constantly since we met Burroughs and Geisen. They say that if you have a hologram and you smash it, every fragment still has the entire image in it. We thought about that in terms of words. We thought, if I'm writing a lyric and include the words John Lennon, we'll guarantee you that in a split second those two words lead you through the Beatles, Beatlemania, John and Yoko, everything else. A huge, massive iceberg of extra information from those two words. That's true of every word we use. Some are more obvious than others. When you're writing, it's really useful and important to think about that. We wrote this whole essay about how every single word we use has this massive library of associations. You go John and Yoko, well, Paul McCartney didn't like Yoko. Then you think Yoko's still alive, but John was shot. Then you think about the guy who shot John, and there's a mass that's downloaded in an instant. That makes every single word we use so powerful. We should be aware of the words we are using and what all the potentials are in terms of its associations where it might lead the listener. Hopefully, it's for a positive reason or purpose, a revelation. That, to me, is one of the devotional responsibilities of the writer. For me, any kind of creation is a spiritual obligation. As we often ask, jokingly yet seriously, what's the first book of the Bible? People say Genesis, and we say yes, but it's called the Book of Creation, which means that God itself thinks that creation is the holy act. And if creation is a holy act, then that's how we should treat it. We're supposed to seize the means of perception and reveal the story at any given time in history. We don't like his story or her story, we prefer a story. Because as Burroughs said, it's not the anything, just various ones. There's not the future, there's a future. Every single living being has a different future. There are billions of futures, and that's just right now. And now it's already gone, and there's another one. It's a deeply responsible job to choose to be creative. Question. So we've run pretty long. I do still have one more little topic area, and then we can come to a close. Answer. Don't hesitate to say more. Question. I see in the press materials that there is a participatory element to the Rubin exhibition, and it reminds me of the temple at Burning Man. Are you familiar with Burning Man? Answer. We know of it, and my younger daughter, Janice, she's been something like 8 or ... Question. Are you there? Nothing. At this point, the system recording our conversation ran out of space and dropped out, cutting off our conversation. I called Genesis back, but felt that it was too much to ask them to go through the whole process of dialing in code simply to get the answer to my last question. The question was regarding the act of ritual participation and whether or not Genesis thought that simply getting individuals to participate in one ritual act could in and of itself lead to awakening our conscious to a higher level. The answer was an immediate and resounding yes. Genesis went on to describe an ideal way of living in intentional communities that would better allow for both the preservation and transmission of significant cultural information as well as provide the necessary space for the creative growth of an individual. Of course, what Genesis did not know was that I was calling them from just such a space. An archive room at Synergia Ranch, which is an intentional community started in 1969 and fitting their description almost to the letter. We then spoke for yet another hour and a half, a conversation that will unfortunately remain off the published record. Since the interview, I have been experiencing more and more synchronicities in my personal life and perceiving a more magical reality. Perhaps sharing this conversation might spark similar experiences in the reader. Better still, if you're in New York City, get to the Rubin Museum and participate in Genesis' exhibit, Try to Alter Everything, to experience the magic firsthand.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real. Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is